and I'm going to be talking about structuring how to structure your analytics team to drive maximum value. And this kind of was talked a lot about yesterday, which I found particularly interesting. Should I centralize the BI team? Should I decentralize the BI team? How do I organize things to drive maximum value to the business? And maybe at some point, slides. Great. So a little bit about Tripadvisor for the non-hoteliers in the room. We're huge. We have 350 million unique users a month, and so that results in a ridiculously large amount of data. So we have, this is all from our 10K. So we have really just a huge amount of analytical processing we have to do every day, and we're just overwhelmed in data. And on top of that, we have multiple business lines outside of hotels. We have attractions, we have restaurants, we have vacation rentals. So there's just a ton of information, and we are kind of, you can easily drown in data from just different customer funnels, different metrics you want to track, different lifetime values. There's just a ton of information, and we just process a ridiculous amount of information. And so the question is, we end up with this huge data lake. The analogy used yesterday, and the vast majority of time, your end users just want some little piece of information out of there, and it seems really obvious. I just want to know about this one thing that happened. Tell me about it, and it's always more nuanced than that. So how do you take this huge amount of data volume, get it into the right people's hands, and drive decisions? So the heart of today's talk is to centralize or not to centralize. So I've experienced doing both. At Living Social, I ran a BI team, a centralized BI team. We had 7 analysts, and we kind of supported the rest of the organization. Between us and the data science team, we probably did 95% of the analysis done at the company. So we were kind of the go-to resource to come help understand what's going on in your business unit. I currently run an analytics team at Tripadvisor, and you can see that it's engineers, not analysts. So it's a fundamentally different structure. So all the analysts are kind of embedded in the different business lines. All the different teams kind of have their own analysts, and so those analysts and the product managers are our customers. So we were building a platform to support them, building tools to support them, but kind of the analysis is all done distributed out throughout the organization. And so I think there are strengths and weaknesses to both approaches, and so I'll just kind of dive into those today. And so at the end of the day, which is better? So better to me is a bigger impact on leadership's decisions. If you're not changing decisions, there's no point in your team. It's that simple. You can have great reports, pretty reports, awesome slides. You can generate a whole bunch of stuff. But if at the end of the year you say, hey, what decision was made differently because of you and your team? If you can't point to anything, why are you there? So to me, it's how can you structure yourself to drive decisions? And the last point of that then is analytics teams become very hard to measure, quite ironically. And the people you'd want to measure them are generally on that team. And so, so generally you don't own a revenue stream. Generally you don't own a part of the website or a supply chain or anything else. You're there to influence other decisions. You just talked about how do you influence those decisions, how do you communicate it, hugely important stuff. But at the end of the day, it's very hard to tangibly say, what was different or not different because of you. Because there's so many other factors to it, and what would have happened if you weren't there. It becomes very hard. So it's not easy to quantify your impact. But at the end of the day, I think you just have to be honest with yourselves, and you should have a whole bunch of people that you worked with over the course of your year to say, yeah, they made my day better, they made my product better, they made us more money, they were critical to our success. And so that to me is your end goal. And hopefully you can point to some things that are tangible. Awesome. So this is hypothetically, my charts got a little messed up. This is the lawyers at Tripadvisor told me I was not allowed to comment on anyone else's business line, so this is a purely hypothetical representation of what may have happened. Any lawyers in the room? Hey, lawyers. Okay. So what we had is we essentially had these 7 analysts, and they would have dotted lines into what were supposed to be business units that some of showed up and some of which didn't. But essentially we would have these, so they would be essentially organized team, and they would have dotted lines into these different groups that would set their priorities. So on the left we had a customer analytics team that really was digital marketing and promotions. We ran a lot of promo codes, and we spent a lot of money on digital marketing. Actually, when I first got there, all our digital marketing, we were spending a ridiculously large amount of money, and it was tracked in a Google spreadsheet. So really not the ideal way in which you want to be measuring your spend. And so we kind of brought in, put a lot more rigor around it, figured out payback models, what are your ROI, and just because this channel is $1 user and this channel is 5, it doesn't mean the 5 was worse because it could be a higher quality user. But we would have people who were specialized and spent their day, went to the team meetings, but at the end of the day reported into me. So kind of the similar model replicated over email. Living Social are really good at sending a lot of email. I apologize. So a lot of customer lifetime value. How do you put together your CRM campaigns? Where are you churning users? What emails are really resonating with people, et cetera. We worked a lot with the data science team, kind of doing a lot of their descriptive work where they would actually put together the algorithms, but helping them identify opportunities, helping put together some clean data sets for them. And then we also did a ton on the web analytics. So what are your purchase funnels? Where are you dropping off users? What do your conversion rates look like? What do your share rates look like? Kind of all these different things. It was all kind of housed in one group. Okay. So Tripadvisor, totally different. So my work there is kind of split into 4 groups. One is the actual infrastructure to process the data. Like I said, we process over 1 billion rows, sometimes 2-3 billion rows of data a day. So we really just need a relatively advanced system just to process that data. We actually just rolled out a real-time system using some open source software from LinkedIn, Kafka and Samza. So it allows us to build those ETLs over the course of the day instead of one big job in the morning. And then we build a lot of tools to actually make accessing that data a lot easier. So how do we kind of remove engineering from analytics? How do we then remove analysts from analytics and kind of make it really easy to access your data, use your data, visualize it, and drive decisions? And it's not just about like you have to have a technical skill or a math background to dive into it. Like I said, we have all these different parts of our business. So we had to spend a lot of time on metric standardization. What is a hotel shopper? How do you define a different device? What is a dated searcher? All these kind of different things, and or how are we defining attribution on our traffic acquisition? All the different business units would go and report to our CEO, and it add up to 120% of revenue. So they're all stealing from each other. So like, how do we kind of one approach to defining traffic source? So we spend a lot of time just on those key business metrics that are shared across the organization. We kind of own the definition of those, but now every individual team, if they have a specific metric that just relates to them, they have freedom to kind of do whatever they want. And then we would do some reporting, kind of one-off, or kind of the CEO's orthogonal data source, asking one-off questions. Are we seeing the same trends that he's seeing reports from everyone else? Can you deep dive into this, et cetera? So the 2 approaches kind of have, I think, very different strengths and weaknesses. So for the centralized, it reduces duplication. When you have one team, you can very easily say, oh no, Mike already did that, you should just take what he did. Or oh, Sarah did something very similar, you can build upon what she's already done, and it can cut your development time in half. There's always this constant communication across your team that can make you a lot more efficient. And it's much easier to leverage best practices, each other's work, personal development. Oh, hey, here's this awesome dashboard or this really great report, or here's this process that we built that had a really big impact on digital marketing. Let's share it across the group very easily. Hey, maybe we could do something similar with email. It was very easy to kind of talk about what was working, what was not working, how are we driving impact, how much money we're helping make the company, and then kind of try to replicate that across the different units. And the other part, it's easier for personal development too. Hey, Mike's really good at this one piece, or has a huge domain knowledge in this one piece. Can I partner with him on some projects because I want to learn about that? And so you kind of have that give and take to grow the different analysts on your team. There's also a part of kind of independent analysis. So if you're, someone was talking about yesterday, you can torture your data to make it tell you whatever you want. And so sometimes you may end up in a situation where you say, hey, this was our ROI on this marketing spend, or this is how this campaign performed, and your boss may not like that number. And if that's your boss, they may tell you to go back and look at it again or revise it, and it can be yeah, some of us have been there. And so there can be a tension there because the person's writing your review and giving you your bonus, and it can be hard to tell that person no. So by having them, the analysts reporting to me, they know that I have their back. They know that they can say something to them that they may not like because I think it's the right way to look at the business, and it'll make us smarter in the long term. And it was also, I think, much more helpful to change culture. to kind of have that center of excellence. So I built this team from me to 7 people, and we kind of found success, replicated it, would have more requests, say, hey, I need more people to answer all these questions. And we kind of organically grew and really changed the culture to be much more data-driven, much more rigorous. And it's hard to change the culture as individual people on individual teams, right? Because all those teams kind of have their own culture. And if you're just one person in there, you can try to add some rigor, but it becomes harder to replicate success and grow it. So if you're really trying to change the culture of how you approach analytics, I think a centralized team to start makes a ton of sense. So for the decentralized model, it reduces bottlenecks, right? So one of the biggest complaints for everyone at Living Social on my team was that we would have a backlog of requests, and someone always thinks they would question our priority list. They would always think their stuff was more important, or that we couldn't get to things. And it would create frustration for different teams that couldn't do the analysis they wanted and couldn't get things done fast enough. So by putting those analysts embedded in those teams, it gives those teams complete independence to manage their resources however they want, and they don't have the same bottlenecks. And if they need more people, they can add more people. So it's definitely a speed wins approach, right? By having your own people in those teams, you can move faster, you can get things done more quickly. You don't have 3-year development processes. You can have things done in the timeline that you need it done. So there's a second piece of the independence, right? There's the independence of your boss telling you to torture your data, and then there's the independence of groupthink, right? By everyone sitting together, everyone thinking the same way, everyone approaching problems in a similar way, you may miss something. Maybe having the people not sit together, they may approach a problem differently. They may define a metric differently. They may come at something slightly in a nuanced way that could be really illuminating. Like, oh, wow, when you look at the repeat rate that way, it's actually really positive. I wonder what's different about that. I wonder how we can replicate that. It's totally different than the result I was seeing. And so by having those kind of independent analysts, you kind of avoid them all thinking about problems in the same way. And the last part is I think it really enables a more data-driven culture. Because my team's goal at Tripadvisor is to really build tools and access to data to make everyone smarter decision makers, not just engineers or not just analysts, but everyone. And so when you have we're a very data-driven organization. On our CEO's door is 2 signs. One is speed wins, and the other is if it's worth doing, it's worth measuring. So you can't go into his office about anything without numbers, right? It has to have numbers. So everyone is analytically driven. It kind of flows down from there. So by having the centralized team, we can kind of build tools to make everyone thinking about data, not just the analyst, not just the technical person. And so I think when you have a culture that you're just trying to amplify, putting those resources out into those teams can really help you grow that faster. So, which is better really depends on your organization. If you have distributed decision-making independent teams, decentralized is better. I mean, it's very much a Tripadvisor. It's everyone, every business line owner owns that small piece of the P&L and really has complete autonomy to get things done as quickly as they can. We really value kind of a startup culture in a big company. So each team feels like a small independent team, and they have independent decision making. And so by having people embedded in those teams, it allows them to move faster, it allows them to make decisions more quickly. So it's also a little bit more expensive, right? I mean, if you're only going to have 2 or 3 analysts, you kind of need to have, depending on the scale of your company, you may need to have a centralized team just to support everyone, because not everyone will be able to hire an analyst. I like one of my favorite sayings is fast, accurate, and cheap, pick 2, right? You can't be fast and accurate and cheap. It doesn't work that way. And so if you want the fast, accurate reporting, you want a more speed wins dynamic culture, you're going to have to pay for it more headcount. And so I think it's really what do you value? So centralized is better when you have centralized decision making. You have a limited number of resources and analysts, and you're trying to change the culture. Like if you're really trying to be a center of excellence and share best practices and go in and improve areas or change how decisions are made, I think there's a lot of value in kind of centralizing it and building up that center of excellence. So that's kind of my experience running 2 very different teams. Very different objectives, and kind of just stepping back and looking at it and saying, what is working, why is it working, and how could I help the next person make a smart decision on how to organize their analytics team. Awesome.